The emergency session had been going on for 6 hours, and Ambassador Velsha of the Takara Union was losing hope. Around the massive circular chamber, representatives from 47 different species argued, threatened, and talked past each other. At the center of it all was a simple question that nobody could answer. Was it wrong for the Zrathi Concordat to enslave the Melians? Velsha watched as Ambassador Kors rose to speak, his spore colony body shifting and pulsing with agitation. "The Melians are primitive," he declared, his voice resonating through the translation devices everyone wore. "They have no space travel, no unified government. The Korthians see them as we see the cells of our own bodies. Individual Melians are simply parts of a greater whole. The Zrathi have every right to organize them as they see fit." A crystalline representative from the Shlavi collective chimed in next, her body refracting light in patterns that showed agreement. "We Shlavi experience time differently than most of you. We can perceive probability strings. In several likely futures, the Melians evolve into a powerful civilization. This current suffering, while regrettable, serves a purpose in their development. Sometimes hardship creates strength." The Empathic Alliance ambassador, a being of pure energy contained in a delicate suit, flickered with what Velsha recognized as anger. "You speak of suffering as if it means nothing. We can feel the pain of the Melian people across space itself. Their anguish is real, and it is happening now, not in some distant future that may never come." "Pain is a biological response," countered the Hive Mind Collective speaker, a single drone representing billions. "We feel no individual pain because we are one consciousness across many bodies. Perhaps the Melians would benefit from similar integration. The concept of individual freedom is merely a chemical illusion created by isolated nervous systems." On and on it went. Every species brought their own perspective, shaped by their unique biology and history. The methane breathers couldn't understand why anyone cared about being so different from themselves. The long-lived Eternals thought in timescales of thousands of years and saw the whole debate as a brief, meaningless moment. The territorial clans believed that might made right, and the Zrathi had the mites, so the discussion was over. Velsha had seen this pattern before. 3 years ago, it had been about whether the Vryn's ritual combat was murder or religious freedom. 5 years before that, whether the Petriforms had rights to planets that carbon-based life couldn't survive on anyway. Every time, the Council deadlocked. Every time, species nearly went to war because they simply couldn't find common ground. The problem was simple to see, but impossible to solve. How could beings who experienced reality in fundamentally different ways ever agree on right and wrong? The Korthians literally couldn't understand individual consciousness the way most species did. The Shlavi genuinely perceived time differently. The collective really did experience existence as a unified whole. None of them were lying or being deliberately cruel. They just couldn't see past their own nature. Finally, after another hour of circular arguments, the council arbiter called for final statements. He turned to the human delegation, who had been sitting quietly in their section since the session began. Humans were the newest members of the council. Admitted only 2 years ago, after their surprisingly rapid technological development caught everyone's attention. "The human delegation has been notably silent," the arbiter said, his tone making it clear this was not a compliment. "Does your species have nothing to contribute to this discussion?" The human representative stood. She was a small woman by human standards, wearing a simple blue uniform with no ornamentation. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chun, and she moved with a quiet confidence to the speaking platform. "We've been listening," she said simply, her voice calm and steady through the translators. "We wanted to understand everyone's position before we spoke. And now that you've listened?" The arbiter prompted. "Do you have a solution to offer, or merely more perspective to add to the pile?" Sarah looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many representatives as she could. Velsha noticed that several species shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. There was something about the way humans looked at you, a directness that many found unsettling. "We have a position," Sarah said. "It's very simple. It doesn't matter how different we all are from each other. It doesn't matter if we're individuals or colonies, if we experience time linearly or not, if we feel pain the same way or think the same thoughts. Here's what matters. If a being can suffer, if they can want things, if they have any experience of existence at all, then enslaving them is wrong. Period. End of discussion." The chamber erupted. Several species began shouting at once. The Korthian representative's spore colony pulsed with what looked like indignation. The Shalavi's crystalline form flickered with confusion. "How dare you speak with such certainty?" Korths bellowed. "You humans have been in space for barely a century. You've been on this council for 2 years. What gives you the authority to declare what is right and wrong for the entire galaxy?" But Velsha noticed something interesting. While many species were angry or confused, others had gone very quiet. The Empathic Alliance representative was perfectly still. Her energy formed steady for the first time all session. A few other delegates were leaning forward, listening intently. The Arbiter raised his hand for silence. "The human representative will explain her reasoning." Sarah shook her head. "It's not about reasoning, not yet. It's about a fundamental truth. Before we talk about culture or biology or different ways of experiencing reality, we need to agree on one thing. Does suffering matter? If a being doesn't want to be enslaved, if they're capable of experiencing that as a bad thing, does that matter or doesn't it?" "But different species define suffering differently," the Shlavi representative protested. "What you call suffering, we might call growth. What you call freedom, we might call chaos." "I'm not asking if we define it the same way," Sarah replied. "I'm asking if it matters at all. And I think it does. I think every species in this room knows it does, deep down. Otherwise, why are we even having this debate?" The Arbiter studied the human carefully. "The Council demands that humanity explain their moral framework. You claim to have found common ground where we have found none. Prove it." Sarah nodded slowly. "We'll need time to prepare. This isn't something we can explain in a few minutes." "You have 1 standard week," the Arbiter declared. "We will reconvene, and humanity will present their case for why the galaxy should listen to them on matters of ethics." This session is adjourned. As the various delegations filed out, Velsha approached the human section. Sarah was gathering her materials, looking tired but determined. "Ambassador Chun," Velsha said quietly, "I hope you know what you're doing. You've just claimed that humanity can bridge philosophical divides that have existed for millennia. If you fail to deliver, your species will lose all credibility on this council." Sarah looked up at him and smiled slightly. "We know, but someone has to try. This council is broken, Ambassador. You know it. Everyone knows it. If we don't find a way to talk to each other about right and wrong, this whole thing is going to fall apart." Velsha watched her leave, then looked back at the empty chamber. She was right, of course. The council was fracturing. But could one young species really have the answer? Could humans, with their brief history and limited experience, truly become the moral compass for an entire galaxy? He supposed they were all about to find out. 1 week later, the council chamber filled again. This time, the atmosphere was different. Word had spread about the human claim, and delegates arrived with curiosity mixed with skepticism. Velsha noticed that even species who rarely attended were present today. Everyone wanted to see if humanity could back up their bold statement. Dr. Sarah Chun entered with a delegation of 12 other humans. Velsha recognized some as diplomats, but others wore different clothing. Scholars, perhaps, or philosophers. The humans arranged themselves in a semicircle facing the council, and Sarah stepped forward. "Thank you for giving us this opportunity," she began. "We've thought carefully about how to explain humanity's approach to ethics. We decided to start with something that might surprise you. We're going to show you our failures." A holographic display activated behind her. Images filled the air above the council floor. Velsha watched as scenes of human history unfolded. He saw humans attacking other humans. He saw destruction, violence, and cruelty on a massive scale. This, Sarah said quietly, was called the Holocaust. Humans killed millions of other humans simply because of their ancestry and beliefs. More images appeared. Humans in chains. Humans being bought and sold. Children torn from parents. This was slavery. For centuries, humans enslaved other humans. We treated our own species as property. The council murmured in confusion. Why was humanity showing them this? The Corthian representative stood. "Are you trying to convince us that humanity is uniquely evil? Because if so, you're making a strange case for being our moral guides." Sarah shook her head. "No, I'm showing you that we're uniquely conflicted. Watch what comes next." The images shifted. Now they showed different humans fighting against the atrocities, protests, revolutions, people risking their lives to free slaves. Soldiers liberating concentration camps, many of them weeping at what they found. For every human who did evil, there were humans who fought against it. We didn't just commit these crimes. We argued about them. We struggled with them. We built movements to stop them. And slowly, painfully, we learned. Another human stepped forward, an elderly man with dark skin and white hair. "My name is Dr. James Okafor," he said. "My ancestors were enslaved. But I'm here today because other humans fought to end slavery. Not because they were enslaved themselves, but because they recognized it was wrong, even though they benefited from it." A younger human woman joined them. "I'm Maya Patel. My ancestors colonized other humans and took their resources. But I'm here today because some of those colonizers' own children looked at what their parents did and said, 'This is wrong. We must make this right.' They turned against their own families because their conscience demanded it." Sarah gestured to the entire delegation. "Every human here has ancestors who were victims and ancestors who were perpetrators. Sometimes this same person was both. We're not claiming to be morally superior. We're claiming to have learned from being morally complicated." The Shavi representative's crystalline form flickered. "I don't understand. Other species had conflicts in their history too. What makes humanity different?" "Diversity," Sarah answered. "Not just biological diversity, though we have that. Diversity of thought. You see, most species evolved with relatively uniform social structures. The Corthians all experience consciousness as a colony. The collective all share one mind. Even species with individual consciousness usually share similar instincts and values shaped by their biology." She pulled up new images showing humans of different appearances from all over their planet. Humans evolved in different environments across our world. We developed thousands of different cultures, languages, and belief systems. We couldn't rely on instinct to tell us how to treat each other because we were too different from each other. We had to think about it. We had to argue about it. We had to build ethical frameworks that could work across our differences. Dr. Okafor spoke again. "When my ancestors and slavers tried to justify slavery, they couldn't just say, 'It's our nature,' because other humans would ask, 'Why isn't it our nature?' They had to make arguments. And arguments can be challenged. Every time humans did something terrible, other humans asked, 'How would you feel if someone did this to you?' That simple question forced us to think beyond our own perspective." Maya added, "We had to develop what we call the veil of ignorance. It means making rules without knowing which position in society you'll have. If you don't know whether you'll be the slave or the master, the victim or the perpetrator, you make fairer rules. We had to learn to think that way because we couldn't predict which group we'd be born into. The Empathic Alliance representative spoke up, her energy form pulsing gently. This is fascinating, but how does this help us? We're not all humans. We don't share your biology or your history. Sarah smiled. Exactly. That's the point. The principles we develop don't depend on being human. They depend on being conscious. Let me show you. She activated a new display. We developed something called the harm principle. Here's the simple version. Your freedom extends until it harms someone else. You can do whatever you want with your own existence. But once your actions cause suffering to another conscious being, we need to talk about whether that's acceptable. But we already discussed this, the Corthian protested. We disagree on what constitutes harm. Do we really? Sarah challenged. Let me ask you directly, Ambassador Korths. Your species experiences consciousness as a colony. If another species came to your world and started breaking apart your colonies, removing individual spores, reorganizing you without your consent, would that be acceptable to you? The Corthian spores rippled with what looked like discomfort. That would be an attack on our very being. Yes, Sarah said softly. It would. Because even though you experience consciousness differently than I do, you still have a way you want to exist. You have preferences. You have things that would harm you. The Melians are the same. They might not be spore colonies, but they have a way they want to exist. The Zrathi are overriding that. They're doing to the Melians what you would consider an attack if someone did it to you. The chamber was very quiet now. Velsha could see that many representatives were thinking deeply about Sarah's words. Another human stepped forward, a middle-aged woman with gray streaks in her hair. I'm Dr. Lisa Zimmerman, and I study philosophy. I want to introduce you to something we call the categorical imperative. Imagine a rule that everyone followed. If that rule would make society impossible or contradictory, it's probably not a good rule. She gestured to the Zrathi section. If every species enslaved every other species they were stronger than, what would the galaxy look like? The Zrathi enslave the Melians today. Tomorrow, someone stronger enslaves the Zrathi. Eventually, only the very strongest species exists, and everyone else is enslaved. Is that the galaxy anyone wants? Even the Zrathi? The Zrathi ambassador, who had been silent until now, shifted in his seat but said nothing. Sarah took the floor again. We're not asking you to become human. We're not asking you to abandon your cultures or your ways of thinking. We're asking you to recognize that consciousness itself, in whatever form it takes, deserves respect. If a being can experience existence, if they can prefer one state over another, if they can suffer when their preferences are violated, then that matters. It matters regardless of how different they are from you. But what about conflicts? The Shlavi asked. What about when species genuinely need the same resources? When values truly contradict? Then we negotiate, Maya said. We find compromises. We look for creative solutions. But we start from the principle that everyone's existence matters to them as much as yours does to you. That's the common ground. That's what we humans learned through centuries of conflict and pain. Dr. Okafor added, we're not saying we have all the answers. We still argue among ourselves. We still make mistakes. But we've developed tools for thinking about ethics that don't depend on biology. They depend on consciousness, on the ability to experience existence. And that's something all of you share, despite your differences. The arbiter leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. The council is intrigued by humanity's presentation. But theory is one thing. Practice is another. Can these principles you speak of actually resolve our conflicts? Sarah nodded. We believe they can. We'd like the chance to prove it." The arbiter looked around the chamber, reading the mood of the various delegates. Velsha could see curiosity on many faces, skepticism on others, but also something he hadn't seen in years: hope. "Very well," the arbiter declared. "The Council will present humanity with a series of ethical dilemmas. These are real conflicts between Council members, disputes that have remained unresolved for years or even decades. If humanity can help us find solutions where we have found none, then perhaps there is merit to their approach." Sarah bowed slightly. "We're ready." The arbiter's expression was grave. "I hope so, Dr. Chun, because if humanity fails, it will prove that ethics cannot transcend biology, that we are all trapped in our own perspectives, forever unable to understand each other. And this council will continue to fracture until it breaks entirely." "We understand the stakes," Sarah said quietly. "But we have to try, because the alternative, doing nothing, guarantees failure." Velsha watched as the human delegation prepared themselves. They looked determined but not arrogant, confident but not certain. They looked, he realized, like beings who had learned hard lessons and hoped those lessons might help others. The galaxy was about to find out if hope was enough. The first test case was presented the following day. The arbiter's voice echoed through the chamber as he outlined the problem that had divided the council for nearly a decade. "The Vrin practice what they call the sacred joining," he explained. "In this ritual combat, two Vrin fight until one is defeated. The consciousness of the loser is then absorbed by the winner, becoming part of them forever. The Vrin consider this their highest honor. The Empathic Alliance calls it murder and demands it be banned." Two representatives approached the center floor. The Vrin ambassador was a tall, muscular being with silver skin that seemed to shimmer with inner light. Across from him stood the Empathic Alliance representative, her energy form crackling with barely contained emotion. "This practice is sacred to us," the Vrin said, his voice deep and resonant. "To join with another, to carry their memories and experiences forward, to make them part of your eternal self, this is the highest form of love and respect. Our greatest heroes seek the joining. To deny us this is to deny our very culture. You kill each other." The empathic representative cried. "We can feel the fear and pain of the defeated right before they cease to exist as individuals. You dress up murder in pretty words, but it's still murder." The arguments continued, each side repeating points they've made for years. Finally, the arbiter turned to the human delegation. "Dr. Okafor, you will mediate this dispute." James Okafor stood and walked to the center, positioning himself between the two representatives. He was quiet for a long moment, then spoke. "Ambassador Vrin, I have a question. What happens to a Vrin who doesn't want to participate in the sacred joining?" The Vrin ambassador hesitated. "It's uncommon. The joining is our way, but it happens." James pressed gently. "Yes, sometimes. They are considered incomplete. They live separate from mainstream Vrin society. They rarely mate or hold positions of honor." James nodded slowly. "So choosing not to participate means exile from your culture, your family, your chance at a normal life?" "We don't force anyone," the Vrin insisted. "The choice is theirs." "Is it really a choice?" James asked. "If refusing means losing everything you've ever known? If everyone you love will look at you with shame? If your children will be outcasts because of your decision?" The Vrin was silent. Around the chamber, Velsha could see other delegates leaning forward, engaged in a way they hadn't been during the original argument. James turned to the empathic representative. "And you, Ambassador. You feel their pain and fear. But do you feel anything else? Any joy or pride or sense of completion from those who win?" The energy being flickered. "Yes," she admitted. "The winners feel transcendent, like they've achieved something profound. So some Vryn genuinely want this, and some genuinely don't, James said. The problem isn't the practice itself. The problem is that consent isn't truly free when the alternative is social death. He looked at both representatives. Here's what I propose. The Vryn can continue their sacred joining, but with two changes. First, Vryn who choose not to participate must be fully accepted in Vryn society. They must have equal opportunities, equal respect, equal chance to thrive. Second, there must be alternative paths to honor that don't involve the joining. Other ways for Vryn to serve their people and be celebrated. The Vryn ambassador's silver skin rippled with uncertainty. Change our entire social structure? Not change it, James corrected. Expand it. Keep what's sacred to you. Just make room for those who find the sacred in different ways. If the joining is truly as meaningful as you say, people will still choose it. But they'll choose it freely, knowing they had real alternatives. The empathic representative pulsed with surprised approval. That could work. If Vryn can opt out without punishment, it becomes a true choice. The Vryn ambassador was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. We would need time to implement such changes. But I can bring this proposal to my people. It honors our tradition while addressing the concern about coercion. I believe this could be acceptable. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the council. A decade-old dispute had moved forward in minutes. The arbiter looked impressed. Next case. The second dispute involved the petroforms, silicon-based life that required extreme heat, and the aqueous collective, who needed extreme cold. Both claimed the same nebula, and both claimed they would die without access to its resources. Maya Patel took this mediation. She listened to both sides explain why they needed the nebula, why sharing was impossible, why the other species should simply go elsewhere. Then she did something unexpected. She pulled up a detailed scan of the nebula itself and displayed it for everyone to see. Look at the thermal map, she said, pointing to swirls of color in the hologram. The nebula isn't uniform. See these red zones? Temperatures high enough for the petroforms. And these blue zones? Cold enough for the aqueous. They're naturally separated by transition zones that neither species can survive in. She rotated the image. You're not fighting over the same space. You're both looking at a nebula and assuming you need all of it. But you don't. The petroforms can thrive in the hot zones. The aqueous can thrive in the cold zones. And there are enough resources in each zone to support both civilizations. The petroform representative, a being of living crystal that glowed with internal heat, studied the map. We assumed the entire nebula was contested space. You never looked closely enough, Maya said simply. Sometimes conflicts exist because we assume they have to, not because they actually do. You're not enemies. You just need different things from the same place. That's not a problem. That's an opportunity to cooperate. She sketched out a resource-sharing agreement on the hologram, showing how each species could harvest from their respective zones without interfering with the other. Within an hour, both representatives were working together on details, the hostility between them evaporating as they realized they'd been fighting over a problem that didn't exist. More cases followed. A dispute about whether artificial intelligences deserved rights. A conflict over whether terraforming uninhabited planets was ethical if it destroyed existing microbial life. A trade disagreement where both sides felt cheated. The human delegation didn't win every case. Some problems were too complex to solve quickly. Some species remained skeptical. But every single dispute moved forward. The humans didn't impose human values on alien problems. Instead, they listened deeply, identified the real issues beneath the arguments, and helped the species involved find their own solutions. Dr. Zimmerman, mediated a conflict about religious practices that one species found sacred and another found offensive. Her solution: creating shared spaces where both could practice their beliefs without forcing contact, while also establishing neutral zones where both agreed to restrain their practices out of respect. Dr. Chun herself took on the most complex case: 3 species competing for colonization rights to the same star system. She didn't try to give the system to one group. Instead, she showed them how to share it, with different planets and orbital zones allocated based on each species' actual needs rather than their wants. Velsha watched it all with growing amazement. The humans weren't smarter than everyone else. They weren't wielding some magical universal truth. They were simply asking better questions. Instead of arguing about who was right, they asked what everyone actually needed. Instead of treating differences as obstacles, they treated them as information. After 2 weeks of mediations, the Arbiter called for a full council session. The chamber was packed. Everyone had heard about what was happening. The council has witnessed something unprecedented, the Arbiter declared. Disputes that have paralyzed us for years have found pathways to resolution. Not because humanity imposed their will, but because they taught us to think differently about our problems. He looked at Sarah Chun. The question now is whether this was a fortunate accident or a repeatable process. Can humanity's approach be taught? Can other species learn to mediate as you do? Sarah stood. We believe so. What we do isn't mysterious. We ask about underlying needs. We look for creative compromises. We separate the problem from the people involved. We focus on interests, not positions. These are skills, not magic. They can be learned. The Korthian representative rose. Velsha tensed, expecting opposition. But Korth surprised him. I have opposed humanity from the beginning, the Korthian admitted. I thought you were arrogant younglings who understood nothing. I was wrong. You understand the one thing that matters: how to help different beings talk to each other. My colony wishes to learn these skills. Other representatives stood, one after another. The Shlavi, the Eternals, even species who had been hostile to humanity. All of them wanted to learn. The Empathic Alliance representative spoke, her form glowing with emotion. For centuries, we have felt the suffering of conflicts we couldn't resolve. Humanity has given us hope that resolution is possible. We support establishing a formal mediation program. The Arbiter nodded slowly. Then let it be so. The Council hereby establishes the Ethical Mediation Course, to be headquartered on Earth and staffed by humans and any other species who wish to learn these methods. Dr. Chun, you will serve as its first director. Sarah bowed. We're honored. But I want to be clear about something. We're not claiming to have all the answers. We're going to make mistakes. There will be cases we can't solve. We're offering a tool, not a miracle. A tool is all we need, Velsha found himself saying, standing to address the council. For too long, we've had no tools at all. We've argued in circles because we had no method for breaking those circles. Humanity has given us a method. That's worth more than certainty. It's worth everything. The council voted. The measure passed with overwhelming support. For the first time in decades, the galaxy had hoped that its growing pains might not tear it apart. But as the celebration began, Sarah looked at Velsha with concern in her eyes. This is the easy part, she said quietly. Wait until we have to enforce these principles against someone who doesn't want to follow them. That's when we'll really be tested. Velsha nodded. She was right, of course. But for today, hope was enough. 6 months after the establishment of the Ethical Mediation Course, the test Sarah had predicted finally came. Velsha was in his quarters when the emergency alert sounded. He rushed to the council chamber and found it in chaos. The Zrathi attacked a human colony, the Arbiter said, grimly as delegates filed in. 3 hours ago. The colony was called New Hope, a research settlement with 50,000 humans. The Zrathi fleet bombarded it from orbit. Velsha felt his body go cold. Casualties? Unknown. Communications are down. But the Zrathi are broadcasting a message to the entire galaxy. The Arbiter activated the holographic display. A Zrathi military commander appeared. His scaled face twisted with contempt. For months, humanity has lectured us about morality. They forced us to free the Melians. They made us look weak. If humans want to be the galaxy's moral police, let them enforce their precious principles. We will not be humiliated by a species that has barely left their own star system. The message ended. The chamber erupted in shouting. Some species called for immediate military response. Others urged caution. A few suggested that humanity had brought this on themselves by being too aggressive in their mediation efforts. Sarah Chun sat in the human delegation area, her face pale but composed. Velsha saw her hands shaking slightly, but her voice was steady when she requested permission to speak. The council must respond, she said. But how we respond will define whether everything we've built has any meaning. You want revenge, the Korthian representative said, not unkindly. That's natural. Your people have been attacked. I want justice, Sarah corrected. And there's a difference. Revenge is about inflicting pain. Justice is about preventing harm and making things right. The Arbiter leaned forward. What do you propose, Director Chun? Your colony has been attacked. 3 hours ago, you might have had 50,000 living colonists. Now you might have none. Will humanity's principles hold when tested with your own blood? Sarah stood and walked to the center of the chamber. Velsha could see tears in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. We're sending a fleet to Zrathi space, she said. But it won't fire unless fired upon. Instead, we're going to do something the Zrathi won't expect. We're going to talk to their people. Confusion rippled through the chamber. The territorial clan's representative, a warrior species that respected strength, growled in disbelief. You'll talk? They just killed you colonists. Maybe they did, Sarah said, her voice cracking slightly. And if so, there must be accountability. But accountability doesn't mean slaughter. It means consequences that prevent future harm and help create understanding. She activated a new display. For the past 6 months, the mediation course has been studying Zrathi society. We've learned something important. The decision to enslave the Melians wasn't universally supported. There were Zrathi voices arguing against it, but they were silenced by their government. The Zrathi people were never given the chance to see the harm they were causing. Dr. Okafor joined her at the center. We've prepared something. A message. Not for the Zrathi government, but for every Zrathi citizen. The display changed, showing a carefully crafted presentation. It started with images of the freed Melians rebuilding their world. Melian children playing, no longer afraid. Melian artists creating beautiful works. Melian scientists making discoveries. Then it showed testimonials. Melians speaking calmly about their experience under Zrathi rule. No inflammatory language. Just simple, honest accounts of separation from families, forced labor, loss of autonomy. Finally, it showed something that surprised Velsha. Zrathi dissidents who had opposed the slavery, speaking about why they believed it was wrong, even though they were Zrathi themselves. We're going to broadcast this to every Zrathi communication channel, Sarah explained. Not as propaganda, as information, as an invitation to the Zrathi people to see what their government did in their name. And then what? The territorial clan's representative demanded. They'll just ignore it and laugh at your weakness. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But maybe not. Humans have learned something important. Most people, regardless of species, don't want to be the villains of their own story. The Zrathi people might not know the full truth. Their government controls their media. If we can show them reality, they might make different choices. The Arbiter looks skeptical. And if they don't? If the Zrathi military attacks your fleet, then we defend ourselves, Sarah said firmly. We're not pacifists. But we're not going to start by assuming violence is the only answer. We're going to give peace we can. The human fleet arrived at the Zrathi homeworld 12 hours later. Velsha watched the feed from the council chamber as hundreds of ships took up position in orbit. The Zrathi military prepared to engage. Then the broadcast began. Every Zrathi communication device, every screen, every public display suddenly showed the human message. The Zrathi government tried to block it, but human technology had advanced rapidly, and the signal was impossible to jam completely. For 2 hours the galaxy held its breath. Velsha watched as the Zrathi military command center barked orders to fire on the human fleet. But something strange was happening. Individual Zrathi ships weren't responding to orders. We're receiving communication from Zrathi vessels, reported a council technician. Multiple ships are refusing to fire. Their crews are demanding to know if the broadcast is true. More reports flooded in. On the Zrathi homeworld, massive protests were erupting. Zrathi citizens were flooding into the streets. They weren't attacking anyone. They were gathering in central squares, holding up signs, demanding answers from their government. The council watched in amazement as what had seemed like an inevitable war transformed into something completely different. The Zrathi people, confronted with undeniable evidence of harm they'd caused, were refusing to defend the indefensible. The military commander who had ordered the attack on New Hope tried to command his forces to fire on the human fleet. Not a single ship obeyed. Instead, junior officers placed him under arrest, broadcasting their actions for all to see. Within hours, the Zrathi government fell. Not through violence, but through the simple refusal of the Zrathi people to follow leaders they now saw as cruel and dishonest. A new Zrathi representative contacted the council, speaking with a shaking voice. We are establishing an interim government. We request human mediators to help us navigate this transition. And we wish to know, the human colony, what happened to them? Sarah, who had been silent throughout the crisis, finally spoke. New Hope had a warning. Our sensors detected the Zrathi fleet before they arrived. The colonists evacuated to underground shelters. There were casualties from the bombardment. 43 dead. Many more injured. But most survived. Relief and grief mixed in her voice. Those 43 people died because violence seemed easier than understanding to some Zrathi leaders. We're going to make sure their deaths meant something. We're going to help your people build something better. The new Zrathi representative bowed his head. We are deeply shamed. We will accept any terms, any punishment. We don't want punishment, Sarah said. We want accountability and growth. We want you to understand what was done wrong, why it was wrong, and how to make sure it never happens again. That's harder than punishment. But it's the only thing that actually creates lasting change. 3 months later, Velsha stood in the council chamber for a very different kind of session. The room was filled with students from dozens of species, all training in the ethical mediation course. Sarah was teaching a class on conflict resolution. Remember, she was saying, the goal isn't to win arguments. It's to solve problems. When the Zrathi attacked New Hope, we could have responded with overwhelming force. We would have won. But what would we have proven? That might makes right. That violence is the solution? A young Korthian student raised a question. But humans died. Didn't they deserve justice? They deserved the assurance that their deaths would lead to a better galaxy, Sarah answered. Killing more people wouldn't bring them back. But helping the Zrathi people build a society that rejects cruelty? That honors their sacrifice. Another student, a Shlavi, asked, what if the Zrathi people hadn't responded? What if they'd supported their government? Sarah's expression grew serious. Then we would have had to make harder choices. We gave peace every chance, but we weren't naive. Our fleet was ready to defend itself. Sometimes, sadly, force is necessary. But it should always be the last option, not the first. And even when we use force, we do it to protect, not to punish. After the class, Velsha approached Sarah. I've been watching the news from the Zrathi homeworld. The changes they're making are remarkable. Sarah nodded. They're doing the work. That's the key. We didn't impose a solution on them. We gave them information and support, and they chose to change. That kind of change lasts because it comes from within. You've accomplished something extraordinary, Velsha said. 6 months ago, the council was fracturing. Now we have a framework for resolving conflicts. Species that were on the brink of war are negotiating. We've made a start, Sarah corrected. But there's so much more to do. New conflicts arise every day. Some will be easy to mediate. Some will be incredibly hard. We'll make mistakes. We'll face situations where our principles are tested even harder than they were with Zrathi. An alarm chimed. Sarah checked her communication device and smiled slightly. Speaking of which, we just received a message from beyond Council space. A new species has made contact. They have practices that none of the current Council members understand. They're asking for human mediators. Velsha felt a flicker of concern. Are you ready for that? Sarah laughed, but it was a tired sound. Probably not. But that's never stopped us before. The beautiful thing about ethical principles is that they apply even to beings we've never met. If they're conscious, if they can experience existence, then they deserve respect and understanding. She gathered her materials. Want to come? You've learned a lot about mediation these past months. We could use your perspective. Velsha hesitated, then nodded. 6 months ago, he'd watched humanity make bold claims about being a moral compass. He'd been skeptical. But they'd proven that morality didn't require everyone to be the same. It only required recognizing that everyone's experience of existence mattered. As they walked toward the landing bay, Sarah said quietly, You know what the hardest part is? Knowing that we can't save everyone. Isn't everyone. That some conflicts won't have happy endings. That sometimes, despite our best efforts, people will suffer. But you keep trying anyway, Velsha observed. We have to, Sarah said simply, because the alternative is to give up on the idea that understanding is possible. And if we give up on understanding, all we have left is force. That's not a galaxy I want to live in. They boarded the ship that would take them to meet the new species. As they left Council space, Velsha looked back at the station where so much had changed in such a short time. Humanity hadn't saved the galaxy by being perfect. They'd helped it by being honest about their imperfections and the lessons those imperfections had taught them. They'd given the galaxy something more valuable than answers, a method for finding answers together. The galaxy still had problems. Species still disagreed. Conflicts still arose. But now, there was a framework for addressing them. A way to talk that transcended biology and culture. A common ground built on the simple recognition that consciousness itself, in whatever form it took, deserved respect. Sarah was reading briefing materials about the new species they'd been called to meet. She looked up and caught Velsha watching her. What are you thinking? She asked. That's 6 months ago. I thought you humans were arrogant for claiming you could be the galaxy's moral compass, he admitted. Now I think you were being humble. You didn't claim to have all the moral answers. You just claimed to have learned how to look for them. That's a much more modest claim than I realized at the time. Sarah smiled. That's the most important lesson we learned from our own messy history. Certainty is dangerous. The people who were most certain they were right did the most harm. What actually helps is curiosity, humility, and the willingness to keep learning. The ship jumped to faster than light travel, carrying them toward another species, another challenge, another opportunity to prove that understanding was possible, even between beings who seemed to have nothing in common. Velsha settled into his seat, watching the stars blur past. The galaxy was vast, full of diversity that sometimes seemed impossible to bridge. But humanity had shown that impossible simply meant difficult, not hopeless. And for the first time in his long career, Velsha believed that the galaxy's future might be brighter than its past. Not because anyone had all the answers, but because finally, everyone was learning how to ask better questions together. The moral compass humanity had become didn't point to a single truth. It pointed toward a process. Listen, understand, respect, and work together to find solutions that honored everyone's existence. That was enough. That was everything. And the journey was just beginning.